You've heard how Salafis claim to follow the first 3 generations of Muslims, the pious predecessors, with unwavering literalism. You've seen Wahhabi preachers denounce popular rituals as innovation, while critics blame them for sowing the seeds of modern extremism. Is this movement the ultimate safeguard of Islamic authenticity, or a rigid ideology that stifles diversity and fuels radicalization? I'm Fakir Al-Kamosh. Over 8 parts, we'll trace Salafism's rise, its theological roots, and its global impact, from conservative calls for reform to contested links with militant groups. Salafism draws inspiration from Quranic injunctions to emulate the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his early companions, literally. Yet its formal emergence took shape centuries later. Quran and Sahaba model primary principle, Ittisal bs Salaf, adherence to the beliefs, language, and practice of the Prophet and the first 2 generations, Sahaba and Tabi'in. Emphasis on Tawhid, God's oneness, and purging any form of innovation, bid'ah. Key texts, verses like, "And whatever the messenger gives you, take it, and what he forbids you, refrain from it," Quran 59.7, anchor the call to strict textualism. Early reformers Ibn Taymiyyah died 728/1328, critiqued excessive saint veneration, intercession, and speculative theology, advocated returning to Quran and Sunnah unencumbered by later scholastic accretions. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab died 1206/1792, sparked a revival in Najd, Central Arabia, condemning practices like shrine visitation and saint cults as shirk, polytheism. Formed an alliance with the House of Saud, giving his movement political backing. Core tenets: absolute monotheism, Tawhid al-Rububiyyah, Tawhid al-Uluhiyyah, Tawhid al-Asma wal-Sifat. 3 dimensions of oneness, lordship, worship, and divine names, attributes, must be protected from any anthropomorphism or mediation. Rejection of bid'ah. Any practice without clear textual warrant is haram. This categoric stance distinguishes Salafis from other Sunni schools that tolerate good innovations. Simplicity of worship, prayer, zakah, fasting, and pilgrimage performed in minimalistic form, free from local customs deemed extraneous. Methodology, literal exegesis, prefer plain meaning over allegorical or contextual readings. Skepticism of taqlid. Blind following of established madhahib is discouraged. Individuals encouraged to consult primary texts or qualified Salafi scholars. Selective ijtihad. While upholding consensus of the Salaf, Salafi thinkers engage in ijtihad to address new issues, but only within narrow textual parameters. Within Salafism, 3 broad categories emerged, each with distinct approaches to society, politics, and militancy. Understanding these currents helps explain both Salafism's appeal and its controversies. Quietist Salafism, Qawlun, core belief, focus on personal piety, strict worship, and non-involvement in politics. Key figures, scholars like Hamoud ibn Kulayb and Salih al-Fawzan, emphasize Tahsin al-Aqda, refining creed, and adherence to basic rituals without challenging rulers. Methodology, prioritize dawah, calling others to purity of worship, over political activism. Avoid takfir, declaring other Muslims unbelievers, except in clear major cases of shirk, associating partners with God. Trust in God's decree, taqwa, implies patience with rulers, even unjust ones, to avoid fitna, discord. Activist Salafism, harakyun, core. Belief, engage in politics and social reform to implement Sharia in society. Key figures, movements like Ansar al-Sunnah in Egypt and al-Wahda al-Wataniya in Jordan advocate electoral participation and legal reform. Methodology: form parties or pressure groups to lobby for Sharia-based legislation. Issue fatwas on contemporary issues, banking, education, family law, rooted in Salafi principles. Sometimes cooperate with secular actors to advance shared moral goals, e.g., anti-corruption, anti-vice laws. Jihadist Salafism, Juhadiyun, core. Belief: armed struggle is necessary to defend or restore pure Islam. Key figures: groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and splinter cells of Taliban adopt a violent interpretation of Salafi takfur and offensive jihad. Methodology: declare existing Muslim governments illegitimate if they don't fully implement Sharia. Apply takfur broadly, declaring entire communities apostate for collaborating with unbelievers. Engage in guerrilla warfare, terrorism, and the establishment of proto-states to enforce Salafi norms. Critiques from Sunni traditionalists, Ahl al-Sunnah. Scholars, leading Hanafi and Shafi'ite jurists, condemn broad takfir and militant tactics as heretical innovations that undermine communal unity and mainstream jurisprudence. Condemnation of extremism. Grand Muftis in Al-Azhar and Deoband issue fatwas denouncing ISIS and similar groups as outside Islam's bounds, stressing that jihad has strict classical conditions not met by self-styled jihadis. Critiques from modernists and reformers. Contextualists argue Salafi literalism ignores historical context, asbab al-nuzul, and maqasid al-shara, higher objectives. They warn that rigid literalism can produce social stagnation. Progressives point to Salafism's gender restrictions, hostility to Sufism, and rejection of modern scholarship as antithetical to Islam's dynamic intellectual tradition. Takfir, the practice of declaring a fellow Muslim an unbeliever, kafir, lies at the heart of Salafi-Wahhabi controversies. While classical jurists set stringent criteria, some Salafi currents expanded its use with profound social and political consequences. Let's unpack the three levels of takfir and see how this excommunication doctrine evolved. Major takfur, takfur al-akbar. Definition: declaring someone an apostate for committing a sin so grave it removes them from Islam, e.g., openly insulting God, denying the prophethood, or engaging in polytheistic worship. Classical safeguards. Due process. A qualified judge must examine evidence, hear defenses, and issue a formal judgment. Repentance. Window. Even on major charges, the accused should be given a chance to repent. If sincere, they return to the fold. Salafi expansion. Some activists bypass judicial safeguards, issuing immediate takfir based on private judgments, eroding due process, and creating cycles of violence when apostates resist. Minor takfir, takfir al-asghar. Definition: labeling certain beliefs or actions as misguided innovations, bid'ah, that verge on disbelief, but do not fully expel one from Islam, e.g., celebrating the Prophet's birthday, Maulid, or visiting saints' shrines. Functional role: used to enforce strict orthopraxy, discouraging popular piety practices by branding them theologically suspect. Contestation: traditional scholars caution that minor takfir inflames communal discord, better addressed through education and gentle rebuke than public excommunication. Takfir by association, takfir bil walaya wal bara'a. Definition: declaring someone an unbeliever for affiliating with illicit groups, political parties, regional governments, or other Muslim communities deemed impure. Salafi application. Extremist factions use this to justify targeting Muslims who vote in elections, support secular laws, or cooperate with Western states, framing them as allies of the infidels. Wider implications. This broad category dissolves community boundaries. Any deviation from Salafi norms becomes grounds for excommunication, feeding militant recruitment and terror operations. Since the 18th century, the alliance between Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab and the Al Saud has underpinned a political religious project exporting puritanical Islam worldwide. Saudi petrodollars have funded mosques, madrasas, and literature, propagating Salafi doctrine across 5 continents. State-sponsored mosques and madrasas, mosque grants. The Saudi government has built or funded over 1,500 mosques in Europe and North America, staffed with imams trained in Wahhabi institutions. These centers often prioritize Salafi curricula, shaping local Muslim communities toward literalist norms. Madrasas in South Asia and Africa. Extensive endowments support thousands of Quranic schools teaching the basics of Arabic, Quran memorization, and Salafi creed texts like Ibn Taymiyyah's Al-Aqidah al-Wasitiyah. Graduates frequently become preachers in rural areas, spreading Salafi ideals among underserved populations. Publishing and media empire literature distribution. Billions of free pamphlets, books, and DVDs featuring works by Ibn Baz, Al-Uthaymin, and modern Salafi scholars circulate in mosques, airports, and via humanitarian aid packages. This saturation ensures Salafi interpretations dominate public discourse, crowding out local traditions. Satellite channels, Saudi-backed television networks, e.g. Iqra Islam Channel, broadcast Salafi lectures globally, offering 24/7 programming that emphasizes strict monotheism, prophetic biography, seerah, and denunciations of innovations. Scholar exchanges and training programs, scholarships to Saudi universities. Thousands of international students receive stipends to study at the Islamic University of Medina or al-Qura University in Mecca, specializing in hadith, tafsir, and creed, aqidah. Upon return, they assume leadership roles in their home communities, reinforcing Salafi networks. Dawah missions. The Muslim World League and the World Assembly of Muslim Youth fund global missionary campaigns, organizing Dawah caravans, conferences, and youth camps that immerse participants in Salafi orthodoxy. Financial controls and incentives, conditional grants. Funding often comes with explicit directives. Imams must teach approved Salafi texts. Mosques must follow prescribed worship styles. Local councils must enforce gender segregation and modest dress codes. Economic dependency. Communities reliant on Saudi funds face pressure to conform, calling critics of Wahhabism ungrateful or traitors, and marginalizing indigenous scholars and practices. To understand whether Salafi Wahhabi education inherently leads to violence, we'll examine real-world trajectories, from London's so-called homegrown jihadists to rural militancy in parts of Africa, factoring in socio-economic and political catalysts alongside ideology. London jihadists, from mosque. Benches to the battlefield profile, young men raised in middle-class suburbs, often well-educated, bilingual, and fluent in Western culture. Drawn to local Salafi mosques or study circles where charismatic preachers emphasize global Muslim suffering. Pathway, local Salafi outreach, attendance at Dawah stalls and weekend purity retreats under Gulf-trained imams. Online reinforcement, consumption of slickly produced propaganda videos, interpreting local grievances, discrimination, war on Islam, through a Salafi lens. Peer networks, recruitment by small social clusters, friends who traveled to Iraq or Syria, reinforcing commitment. Trigger events. Foreign policy grievances, Western interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan cited as religious obligation to defend the Ummah. Identity crisis. Feelings of marginalization lead seekers to adopt a clear, absolute identity defined by Salafi, us versus them. Outcome. Dozens of Britons pled guilty to planning or conducting terrorist attacks, many citing their duty to establish pure Sharia as mandated by Salafi jurisprudence. Sahel and Sub-Saharan Africa, pragmatic militancy. Profile rural youth facing land scarcity, ethnic tensions, and weak state presence, from northern Mali to Nigeria's Lake Chad Basin. Pathway, local Salafi preachers. Funded by Gulf Charities, they build mosques offering food aid, education, and legal counsel, filling governance vacuums. Militarized offshoots. Groups like Boko Haram or Ansar Dine adopt Salafi-inspired rhetoric to justify weaponizing local grievances, taxation, banditry, and communal reprisals. Economic incentives. Militancy offers steady income via looting, kidnapping ransoms, or state subventions, making armed struggle a viable livelihood. Trigger events. Communal conflict. Land disputes or farmer-herder clashes framed as existential threats to pure Muslim communities. State repression. Heavy-handed security operations alienate populations, driving them into the arms of armed Salafi factions promising justice. Outcome: a complex insurgency where Salafi doctrine intertwines with local survival strategies, yielding long-term instability and humanitarian crises. The copycat phenomenon, online radical echo chambers. Profile: disenfranchised individuals across Europe and North America, often isolated, unemployed, or estranged from family. Pathway: algorithmic exposure. Social media feeds recommend increasingly extreme Salafi or jihadist content once a user clicks on harmless religious videos. Virtual cells. Encrypted chat groups form, offering on-demand theological justification for violence, direct advice on weapons procurement, and moral support. Self-radicalization. Without any in-person jihadi recruiters, individuals pledge allegiance to foreign terror groups and plan lone wolf attacks. Trigger events. Global crises, refugee influxes, perceived Islamophobia, or sensational news coverage spur outrage channeled into online networks. Psychological vulnerabilities, mental health issues, social rejection, or personal trauma make individuals receptive to absolute Salafi narratives offering purpose. Outcome: solo attackers with minimal training but deadly intent. Evidence that Salafi easily co-opts digital natives without traditional mosque structures. While these case studies suggest a correlation between extremist acts and Salafi exposure, a causal link is far from straightforward. Several mitigating factors shape the journey from doctrine to violence. Selective doctrine versus contextual realities. Not every Salafi Wahhabi-educated individual embraces violence. Most remain quietists. Extremists selectively amplify takfir and offensive jihad texts, ignoring the broader corpus, advocating obedience to rulers and due process. Socioeconomic grievances, poverty, lack of opportunity, and social exclusion often precede ideological commitment. Salafi networks provide social services and a sense of belonging, pull factors that radical ideologues exploit for mobilization, political trauma, and state failure. Foreign interventions, corruption, and violent crackdowns delegitimize government authority, making Salafi calls for alternative governance more appealing. Where states fail, Salafi militancy fills the void. Peer dynamics and group psychology radicalization is rarely a solo endeavor. Peer pressure, group cohesion, and the human desire for adventure and recognition drive recruits to act, even when doctrine alone might not suffice. Can reformist Salafi scholars reclaim their creed from extremist usurpation by emphasizing classical checks on takfir and jihad? Should counter-radicalization focus on ideological deprogramming or address root socio-economic and political grievances first? How can communities nurture critical-minded Salafi adherents who resist extremist narratives while preserving their devotion to early Muslim models? Confronting Salafi-inspired extremism requires holistic strategies, ideological correction, social reintegration, and psychological support. Let's examine key approaches employed in Saudi Arabia, Europe, and Southeast Asia. Saudi Arabia's Counsel and Rehabilitation Program. Structure. Established in 2005 under the King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Foundation, the program operates dedicated centers in Riyadh, Jeddah, and Medina. Detainees, former jihadis or supporters, enter a 12 to 18-month curriculum combining religious re-education. Sessions led by respected Salafi scholars clarify correct interpretations of takfir and jihad, emphasizing obedience to rulers and due process. Texts of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Uthaymin are revisited with counter-extremist commentary. Psychological counseling. Licensed therapists address trauma, identity crises, and cognitive distortions. Group therapy breaks the isolation of radical narratives, replacing it with peer support. Vocational training. Courses in carpentry, IT, and entrepreneurship equip participants with skills to earn a livelihood upon release. Outcomes. Official statistics claim a 90% success rate, meaning no reoffenses recorded among graduates over 5 years. Critics question transparency and the voluntary nature of participation. European Prevent and Exit programs, United Kingdom's Prevent Strategy community engagement. Channel panels bring together police, social workers, and Muslim community mentors to identify at-risk individuals under the UK's Counter-Terrorism and Security Act, 2015. Tailored support plans. At-risk youth receive mentoring, family counseling, and monitored religious education, often at local Salafi mosques willing to participate in dialogue. Challenges. Accusations of stigmatizing Muslim communities, difficulty measuring long-term impact, reliance on law enforcement undermines trust. Germany's Exit Deutschland, former extremists as mentors, reformed jihadists counsel recruits on disillusionment with violence. They leverage insider credibility to challenge ideology. Holistic reintegration. Social workers aid with housing, education, and legal aid. Graduates often join the program as peer supporters. Southeast Asia's community-led models, Indonesia's peace villages, local fatwa councils, Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah issue regional rulings condemning jihadi interpretations, providing religious cover for de-radicalization. Village forums, elders, educators, and former militants convene open-air dialogues, sharing personal stories of regret and forgiveness. Cultural performances reinterpret Salafi texts through Javanese art forms, neutralizing absolutist readings. Philippines, Aman, Pathways to Peace. Trauma, Informed Care. Recognizing Mindanao's protracted conflict, this program integrates trauma counseling with Quranic ethics, teaching empathy through story circles and family reconciliation sessions. Youth apprenticeships. At-risk teens train under local craftsmasters, linking material skills with moral mentorship, offering an alternative identity to Salafi militancy. No program is foolproof. De-radicalization efforts face structural and ethical hurdles. Voluntariness versus coercion. Programs tied to legal sentences may drive surface compliance, not genuine ideological change. True transformation demands voluntary engagement, yet security concerns often push authorities to mandate participation. Measurement dilemmas, recidivism rates. Low reoffense numbers are encouraging but may mask unreported plotting. Ideological shift. Surveys assess changes in beliefs, but social desirability bias can inflate positive responses. Stigma and reintegration. Graduates often struggle to find employment or community acceptance, pushing them back toward fringe networks. Successful programs integrate family reconciliation and public narratives of forgiveness to normalize their return. Counter-narrative credibility. Only insider voices, former extremists or respected Salafi scholars, carry weight. However, recruiting credible scholars willing to publicly oppose jihadi rhetoric remains a challenge. Balancing security and trust programs, relying on intelligence services, risk eroding trust. Involvement of civil society and religious NGOs can mitigate surveillance fears, fostering safe spaces for honest dialogue. Can de-radicalization steer clear of coercive artifice and build genuine conviction? Should resources shift from security-led models to community-owned initiatives emphasizing social cohesion? How do we amplify insider counter-narratives without compromising sincerity or safety? Beyond formal programs, the most enduring bulwark against extremism is the everyday network of family, friends, and local institutions. Their influence often determines whether a vulnerable individual drifts toward radical Salafi ideologies or finds a path of resilience. Family engagement. Emotional anchor. Loving relationships buffer youth from the allure of absolutist ideologies. Parents who maintain open dialogue about faith, politics, and personal struggles foster trust and critical thinking. Intergenerational transmission. Grandparents and elders share lived stories of community struggle and reconciliation, offering models of faith that emphasize compassion over coercion. Early warning signs. Families trained to spot behavioral changes, withdrawal, secretive internet use, abrupt changes in piety, can intervene before extremist narratives take root. Peer networks and mentorship. Positive peer influence. Youth counselors and local mentors, sports coaches, teachers, religious guides build relationships grounded in mutual respect, providing alternative role models to online radicalizers. Mentorship circles. Small groups meeting regularly for study, service projects, and recreation create a sense of belonging that counters the isolation extremist recruiters exploit. Local religious institutions, inclusive mosques. Community centers that blend Salafi theology moderation with outreach, welcoming diverse practices, hosting family events, and facilitating dialogue between different Islamic schools, undermine monolithic narratives. Counseling services. Imams and mosque committees trained in mental health first aid and conflict resolution offer confidential support, bridging spiritual care with professional counseling. Civic and cultural organizations, youth clubs, local NGOs run cricket leagues, arts workshops, and coding labs alongside faith discussions, promoting teamwork and critical literacy in a non-judgmental setting. Cultural festivals, celebrations of Islamic heritage, poetry nights, food fairs, theatrical performances, root identity in shared culture rather than imported ideologies. Community-led preventive campaigns, Speak Up initiatives. Neighborhood drives encourage residents to safely report concerns via anonymous hotlines, ensuring early interventions without fear of stigma. Counter-narrative workshops. Grassroots groups produce podcasts and video testimonies featuring former radicals, local imams, and survivors, humanizing the costs of extremism and modeling alternative voices. How can families balance respect for personal faith journeys with vigilance against extremist influences? What training and resources do community leaders need to become effective preventers of radicalization? Can cultural programs reclaim local identity from global Salafi narratives and foster genuine belonging? Beyond formal programs, the most enduring bulwark against extremism is the everyday network of family, friends, and local institutions. Their influence often determines whether a vulnerable individual drifts toward radical Salafi ideologies or finds a path of resilience. Family engagement, emotional anchor. Loving relationships buffer youth from the allure of absolutist ideologies. Parents who maintain open dialogue about faith, politics, and personal struggles foster trust and critical thinking. Intergenerational transmission. Grandparents and elders share lived stories of community struggle and reconciliation, offering models of faith that emphasize compassion over coercion. Early warning signs. Families trained to spot behavioral changes, withdrawal, secretive internet use, abrupt changes in piety, can intervene before extremist narratives take root. Peer networks and mentorship. Positive peer influence. Youth counselors and local mentors, sports coaches, teachers, religious guides build relationships grounded in mutual respect, providing alternative role models to online radicalizers. Mentorship circles. Small groups meeting regularly for study, service projects, and recreation create a sense of belonging that counters the isolation extremist recruiters exploit. Local religious institutions, inclusive mosques, community centers that blend Salafi theology moderation with outreach, welcoming diverse practices, hosting family events, and facilitating dialogue between different Islamic schools, undermine monolithic narratives. Counseling services. Imams and mosque committees trained in mental health first aid and conflict resolution offer confidential support, bridging spiritual care with professional counseling. Civic and cultural organizations, youth clubs, local NGOs run cricket leagues, arts workshops, and coding labs alongside faith discussions, promoting teamwork and critical literacy in a non-judgmental setting. Cultural festivals, celebrations of Islamic heritage, poetry nights, food fairs, theatrical performances, root identity in shared culture rather than imported ideologies. Community-led preventive campaigns, Speak Up initiatives. Neighborhood drives encourage residents to safely report concerns via anonymous hotlines, ensuring early interventions without fear of stigma. Counter-narrative workshops. Grassroots groups produce podcasts and video testimonies featuring former radicals, local imams, and survivors, humanizing the costs of extremism and modeling alternative voices. How can families balance respect for personal faith journeys with vigilance against extremist influences? What training and resources do community leaders need to become effective preventers of radicalization? Can cultural programs reclaim local identity from global Salafi narratives and foster genuine belonging? As we wrap up our deep dive into Salafism and Wahhabism, remember, eradicating extremism demands more than law enforcement. It requires a whole-of-society strategy. Integrated defense framework, family and community, maintain open faith dialogues at home, involve parents and elders in early warning networks, and support local mentorship circles. Religious leadership, back authentic Salafi scholars who clarify Takfir's limits, promote quietist and activist currents over jihadist paths, and reject innovations responsibly. state and civil society, enact anti-discrimination laws, fund de-radicalization centers, expand educational reforms, and create economic opportunities to remove extremist recruitment levers. Empowering moderate voices. Amplify credible scholars. Use social media to share counter-extremist lectures by respected Salafi jurists, clarifying that devotion to the Salaf need not entail intolerance or violence. Support activist Salafi groups. Engage political currents working within democratic frameworks to advance moral reforms without resorting to militancy. Personal responsibilities. Stay informed. Learn about Islam's diverse interpretations. Don't let extremist soundbites define your worldview. Speak out. Challenge hate speech and takfirism in online and offline conversations. Offer empathetic listening to those at risk. Give and volunteer. Contribute to community projects, legal aid clinics, youth apprenticeships, or mental health workshops that address grievances exploited by recruiters. A vision of resilience. Holistic security. True safety arises when citizens see their future intertwined, when jobs, justice, and genuine belonging eclipse the hollow promises of extremism. Faith in action. Let your devotion to the Salaf inspire compassion, not coercion. Model the Prophet's mercy in every interaction. Extremism thrives in the shadows of neglect. Let light of community, conscience, and opportunity banish its darkness.